Greetings, everybody. Keith Billick here, and welcome to a special holiday edition bonus episode of the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. Being a bonus episode, I'm not going to do most of the usual preamble, but suffice to say, I'm thankful for all of you listeners, and especially those VIP, very important picker supporters. So if you do enjoy the podcast, please consider heading over to patreon.com/banjopodcast to support the show with a few dollars per month. It does very, very much help. Once again, patreon.com/banjopodcast. And of course, thanks to the regular sponsors of the show, Peghead Nation Sullivan Banjos, Elderly Instruments, and Bluegrass Country Radio. So this bonus episode is a fireside chat with legendary bluegrass banjoist Bob Black. Now, if you want to learn more about Bob himself, just scroll back in the feed and find episode 151 for that full interview with him. However, when we were both at the Great Lakes Music Camp this past fall, there was a separate event with Bob, and the whole premise of it was a fireside chat where he could tell some Bill Monroe stories. So I did not really have anything to do with it other than I was lucky enough to be there with a microphone and able to record it. So thank you so much to Jason Wheeler and everyone at the Great Lakes Music Camp who helped make this possible. And thank you for Bob for allowing me to put a microphone in front of his face for a second time over the weekend. And I hope you all enjoy these Bill Monroe stories by former Bluegrass Boy himself, Bob Black.
I'm here to talk about Bill Monroe and my experiences with Bill. I really loved playing with him. He treated me really good. You always hear these stories about Bill being hard to work for, but I never had that problem with him at all. He was a real friend to me, and I did the work. They say you always had to work on the farm with Bill. Well, I did that too, and I wasn't from a farm originally, so when I would go out and work a little bit on Bill's farm, that was fun for me too, you know. Yeah, well, I lived in Nashville when I was with Bill, and it was a little bitty duplex on Ferguson Avenue, and he would. I didn't have to go work on the farm all that many times, but sometimes the phone would ring early in the morning, about 7 a.m. or so. And I had been partying and jamming all night before, and I probably just got to bed about 3 a.m. or something. And the phone would ring, and I'd pick it up, and he'd say, "Are you awake?" And I'd say, "Oh, yeah." And he says, "Well, I didn't have a regular day job of any kind, and I was in my early 20s, so I was young and healthy and skinny, not like I am now, but he would call me up like that. Then he'd ask me to meet him at this restaurant, which was up in Goodlettsville. It was a little old country restaurant, and he'd buy me breakfast, and we'd have biscuits and gravy, etc. And then we'd go out to his place, and most of the time we would set fence posts. And so I learned how to build fence, and I enjoyed it, man. He hauled the posts with mules sometimes, and he cut his own fence posts out of the timber on his farm, and he loved doing that. He loved building fences, and so to this day, if I see a fence that's really well built and straight, and the posts are evenly spaced, I can appreciate that now from that work that I did with Bill. But of course, I didn't join Bill Monroe just so I could do work on his farm. And sometimes we'd go up to Beaver Dam, Kentucky, which was maybe 2 or 3 hours north of there, and he had a plot of land not far from where he grew up, and he was going to put on a festival up there. And the festival did come out. It didn't last I don't think it lasted a couple of years, 2 or 3 years. But I helped him do a bunch of work up there too, and helped him build fence. Most of what I did was build fence. And but I remember one day we worked all day, and I didn't have any work gloves on, and the barbed wire slipped and broke and cut my hands pretty bad. But we sat after the day was over. We sat down on the grass and just were talking and resting. And then the next day, I had sugar bites all over my. And I know that he had them. He must have got them too, you know. Anyway, I just wanted to talk about the farm work because most people did not like having to work on Bill's farm. And so if you had another job, of course, you know, he wouldn't ask you to do that. But he knew that I didn't. And I just became really good friends with him. And he treated me really good. So, but I intended to do was start out by describing my audition for Bill Monroe. This group that I was playing with up in Iowa City, Iowa, we called ourselves the Bluegrass Union. Well, as all groups eventually do, we had a huge personality clash, and we got all mad, and I said, I'm quitting and everything. And I said, I'm going to try to go play with Bill Monroe. You know, I was real cocky. So I went and visited this guy down in St. Louis. It was a fiddler by the name of Smokey McGinnis. And he was a good fiddler, man. And he lived in the St. Louis area. He was a friend of Bill Monroe's. And he used to ride with him on the bus sometimes. And Bill really liked Smokey. And we learned a lot of tunes from Smokey, too. And as a matter of fact, Smokey would make recordings of the Grand Ole Opry appearances on a cassette tape. And that's where we learned the tune Jerusalem Ridge, because Monroe played that tune on the Grand Ole Opry a time or two before he even recorded it. And so we learned it off of that. And this was when we were still the Bluegrass Union in Iowa City. And then Bill Monroe came up to Iowa City to do a concert up there, and we were the opening band for him. So we were just tickled to death to get a chance to open up for Bill Monroe. And so we were going to play Jerusalem Ridge. And we were practicing it backstage, and Kenny Baker, who we had done a lot of jamming with, Kenny Baker come up and says, I wouldn't play that tune, boys. Yeah, Bill hasn't even recorded that yet. So we didn't do it. But anyway, so that's how come I knew how to play Jerusalem Ridge, was from Smokey's tape of the Grand Ole Opry doing it. And so I went down to visit Smokey, and I told him, you know, I'm quitting the band. And he says, well, you ought to get a job. You ought to try to get a job with the old man. He called him the old man. And so he called Bill Monroe while I was visiting him in his house. He called Bill Monroe, and he says, how you doing? And Bill said, well, not too good. My banjo player just quit. And that banjo player was Dwight Dillman. And Bill said, well, I've got somebody here that would be interested in coming down there and playing. And so I went down there the next day. But Bill, he wouldn't admit it, but he already knew who I was because I had done a lot of jamming with Kenny Baker at Bean Blossom. We used to jam all night at Bean Blossom, the festival up in Indiana that Bill put on. And at a few times, we saw Bill standing over there off to the side listening to us, you know. So he pretended like he didn't know who I was. So I went down there, and he had a little office on 16th Avenue. It was in a house converted into an office building. And I went down there, and he had a secretary, I guess, sitting there, and she sent me in there. And so I went into this room, and he had a desk in there, and he had this ring. It's the only time I ever saw him wear this ring. It was shaped like a mandolin. A great big, had diamonds in it. And he was sitting there, and I still remember there was a shaft of sunlight coming in, shining on that ring. And the first thing I saw when I walked in there was that bright diamond ring, you know, in my face. And so I got the banjo out. He wanted to hear a little bit of picking. He'd already heard me play before up in Bean Blossom, but he wanted me to play anyway. So I played the first tune I played was a Kenny Baker tune called Shelby Rock. And it was a good tune. I don't know if I could play it anymore now or not, but it was a great tune. And he said, "Oh, that's pretty good, but you're going to have to know tunes like Bill Monroe's Kentucky Mandolin," he said. And that's how he said, "Bill Monroe's Kentucky Mandolin." So I said, "Yeah, I can play that." And I tuned my second string down to a minor pitch and played that a little bit for him. And then he asked if I knew the Watson Blues. And I had heard that somewhere before, and I played a little bit of that for him. And so he says, "Well, that was it." And he says, "Well, okay, we're leaving tonight. At 3 a.m. We're going to leave tonight at 3 a.m. at this place called Vanetta's, which was like a gas station kind of little truck stop." So we met at Vanetta's, and Dwight Dillman, who was the banjo player that was leaving, he was still with him at that time, and we did a couple of trips with me and Dwight both playing banjo. So he didn't have his bus because that bus was always broken down. I mean, it was old when he bought it, and it was always being in the shop or being repaired, or they'd have to go up to Kentucky and get a tow truck to haul it back down and stuff. So we almost never had the bus when we were playing with Bill. And he had a Pontiac Safari station wagon. And we'd all pile in that station wagon with the bass in there. And there would be, I think when we first pulled out, the Kenny Baker, I think, was driving. Bill always sat in the front passenger seat. And then it was just me and Dwight Dillman in the back, because Randy Davis and Ralph Lewis, who were the bass player and the guitar player, lived in Asheville, North Carolina. And the place we were going to play was Black Mountain, North Carolina. And that's where the tune Black Mountain Rag came from, that town in North Carolina. And so we got in that station wagon and headed out, and I think it was probably about a 6-hour drive or something. We got in there, pulled in there about 10 a.m., and I was just dragging, man. And we got out and we played the show, and several shows, and Dwight and me kind of traded banjo licks, and but Dwight brought a pillow with him when we were riding out there, and so I learned the hard way that you should bring a pillow with you if you're going to ride in the station wagon. So, but anyway, so that was my first gig with Bill, and I still wanted to do it, but it really kind of wore me out, and I wasn't really expecting to have to head out at 3 a.m. But he didn't want to have to be on the road any more than necessary, so he would leave as late as he could possibly leave, and then he would head back home. No matter how late it was, he'd head back home. He wouldn't stay overnight, and so I think I only got $50 for that. At that time, he was paying $50 a day to his musicians. And so we played, and that's only on the days that you play. So if you left out on a Friday night, you played during Saturday, then you didn't get back till Sunday morning, you still only got $50 because you only played one day, Saturday. So I learned a lot from Bill, and he would sometimes sit in the station wagon and play his mandolin. He'd be playing tunes as we traveled down the road. And at that time, I smoked, and Kenny Baker smoked, and Randy Davis smoked. And we all smoked in the station wagon. And Bill didn't ever seem to be bothered by the smoke. He never said, "Put out those cigarettes. It's bad for my voice." He didn't. He was really funny about. They say drinking coffee is bad for your singing voice. Well, Bill, nobody ever told Bill that, because he drank coffee all the time, and he'd drink a cup of coffee right before getting on stage. And eventually, I was able to quit smoking, but. And also I wanted to talk about that, the back seat of that station wagon where the Bluegrass Boys all sat. There would be 3 Bluegrass Boys sitting in the back seat, and there was something underneath the framework underneath the seat on the left-hand side. There was a bump there that you would have to sit on. If you were on the furthest to the side, you'd have to sit on this bump. And we always thought it felt like you were sitting on an apple. And so we'd always take turns, say, who's going to sit on the apple? Whose turn is it to sit on the apple? But we traveled all over the country in that thing. And we didn't do everything with the station wagon. Once in a while, we borrowed, James Monroe had a motorhome, his son, James Monroe, and the Midnight Ramblers, that was the name of his band. Well, we took his motorhome out to California. So the bus, which was called the Bluegrass Special, but behind Bill's back, we secretly called it the Bluegrass Breakdown because it was always broken down. The bus did run. We did a few trips in the bus, but anyway, so we took that motorhome out to California, and we played some shows out there. He was putting on a festival. I think he was involved with some other people, and he was trying to put on a lot of festivals at that time. And he had one it was in Norco, California, and I think that's somewhere around L.A. Norco, California, and he had some good people out there. The McLean family. I don't know if you ever heard the McLean family, but they were a really good family band. And he had, I think he had Lester Flatt out there because I remember Marty Stewart being there. And Marty was just a little kid, and he was playing with Lester Flatt. So for some reason, I don't remember Lester being there, but he had to be because Marty wouldn't have been there if Lester. So Marty Stewart was there, and because I have a picture of all of us on stage. And Marty's in the picture, and the McLeans are in the picture. And so we played that festival. That ran for 3 days, I think, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We'd play gospel shows on Sunday. Back then, a lot of festivals today don't even have a gospel show on Sunday. A lot of time, that's not true of all of them, but back then, you always had a gospel show every Sunday, and the groups would always play nothing but gospel on Sunday morning. So anyway, the bus, when the bus was running, the heating system on the bus never did work right, and he never would fix it. And he had a propane tank with it was a round disc that was fastened to the top of the propane tank, and they'd fire that thing up and light a match to it. And he had that a bungee cord. So it wouldn't fall over, and the screen on the front of that thing was all busted out too, so it was even more dangerous. And he fired up that propane thing, and that was how the bus was heated, man. And if you walked by it, you had to really watch out so that your coattail wouldn't touch that thing because it'd set your clothes on fire, man. But he played his mandolin a lot more on the bus because he was more comfortable doing it there, and he would sit in the passenger seat, not the shotgun seat. The shotgun seat was right up front next to the driver, but the next seat back, Bill Monroe would sit there all the time, and he'd play his mandolin for hours, and it was really fun to listen to him play the mandolin. He'd play all these tunes, and I learned a lot of tunes from him, and I would ask him, "What was that tune, Bill?" And he said, "That's one I wrote called The Real Foot Reel," and it was named after Real Foot Lake, which was a lake down in Tennessee. So I need to teach that to Addie and Will, the people I'm playing with. Sometime I'll teach them that tune. But anyway, he played all kinds of tunes. He played Durang's hornpipe, and his favorite tune of all was Sally Gooden. He says to him, that was the mother of all fiddle tunes, was Sally Gooden, man. And he played it fast. And then if he was willing to teach you a tune. If you asked him to play a tune over again, he would play it for you, but he would never slow it down. He would just keep playing. He would play it over and over and over again, and you'd just have to pick it up on the fly because he would not slow a tune down. And he always had this philosophy that a tune, he was actually an old-time fiddle player. He just didn't play them on the fiddle. That's what he really loved, was playing tunes. If he could have just done nothing but play tunes on stage, that's what he really would have liked, because he had all kinds of tunes in his head, you know. But he wouldn't slow a tune down so that you could actually learn it. And he would say a tune is a living thing. It's like, it's a living thing, and you should not mess with it. You should play it the way it's supposed to go, because it's a living thing, and so you should, and it's going to be around after you're dead and gone. That tune is still going to be around. So it's more important. The tune is more important than the musician. That's how it was his philosophy. And I don't know if I agree. I do agree that you should play a tune the way it's supposed to go, but then you should be able to, you know, put your own slant on it too. But that's not what he did. He played it the same way every time. Well, different people have different versions of tunes. And one example is the tune Dusty Miller, which Kenny Baker hated playing because Bill played it too fast, according to Kenny. Kenny always said if he played that tune just a little bit slower or a little bit faster, he'd be able to play it. But Baker always played it at a tempo that didn't suit Kenny at all, and he always hated having to play that. And it is, if you ever hear Bill Monroe play Dusty Miller, it is fast, and it's hard the way he does it, man. And it's a great tune. I love it. But I've heard it played real slow too, and more like Texas style. And it's, you know, it's a fun tune, but not at the tempo that Bill played it. And I always had, he never actually said this, but I always had this idea that since he considered a tune a living thing, if you slowed it down, that was like dissecting a cadaver and performing an autopsy on it. And so so he didn't slow it down. He just, you know, and that's how he wrote tunes too. He'd just start playing and he'd mess around, and he would not play them slow. He'd just keep messing around until something came out, and then he'd hang with it, you know. And anyway, I have, you know, a lot of stuff to talk about with Bill Monroe, but if anybody wants to ask any questions, yes, sir.
Was it free work on the farm, or did he pay you?
He paid me a little bit, but not much. It wasn't much. Yeah, I think it was less than $50 a day on the farm, and it was a lot harder work. I remember Roland White, who was in there before I was. He was a great mandolin player, but when he joined Bill, he played guitar, and they had them go up to Bean Blossom. Bill was just starting the festival in Bean Blossom when Roland was in the band. And he didn't call it a bluegrass festival. He called it a bluegrass celebration. And he had Roland and Vic Jordan and Kenny Baker. They were up there all summer long before that festival, helping to build a stage down there, because it was on a place called the Brown County Jamboree. And there was an old stage down there that had rotted away, and so they had to build a new stage. And so they built that stage, and they worked all summer on it. There was a couple of little cabins up there, and they slept in those little cabins on these cots that Bill probably bought at a Goodwill somewhere or something. And then Bill's girlfriend, Bessie Lee, was there. And they had the good cabin. The Bluegrass Boys had the little cabin with the little cot, no running water, no restrooms. If you got up in the middle of the night, you just go out in the woods. There was a restroom up in the barn, which is now no longer standing, but there was a restroom, and they had to take their showers up there too. They rigged up a garden hose. Luckily, I didn't have to do any of this, but Roland told me all about this. They rigged up a garden hose and hung it up there, and they'd get under that shower, and it was freezing cold water, and so they'd get themselves wet, and then they would get away and then soap themselves all up real good. Then they get under the shower again and hose. Anyway, that was and the story about the barn is really funny too. The Brown County Jamboree barn, they used to put on country shows in that barn too, and that went back even before Bill Monroe's owned the place. They had country music, because it was only like 3 or 4 hours north of Nashville. And so they'd get country music groups to come up there. And I remember one time we went up there for a Sunday afternoon show in the barn, and the headliner was Ernest Tubb and the Texas Troubadours. So I really was happy to get a chance to hear Ernest Tubb live right in front of me, and of course I heard Ernest Tubb on the Grand Ole Opry all the time. Back then, all the old timers were still there. Ernest Tubb, Hank Snow, Charlie Walker, the Willis brothers, they were all still around at that time, and it was really fun hearing them. And so anyway, so we played the Opry quite a few times too. And the Opry didn't pay very well either, so... Well, everybody in Nashville can play really good. There's nobody that goes to Nashville that can't really play good, and most of them never get any work down there. And Baker always used to say, there's people pulling curtains backstage at the Grand Ole Opry that can play better fiddle than I can. He always said that. But so anyway, that was quite an experience playing in Nashville. Nashville has really changed now since those days. You can't hardly drive around there now. It's like the whole place is I-40 and I-65 joined together right there, I believe. And there's all kinds of clover leaves and mixed masters, and the traffic is horrible, and you're taking your life in your hands trying to drive around Nashville right now. But it wasn't quite that bad back in those days. But anyway, early on, I joined in Bill Monroe in September of 1974, and I lasted until September of 1976. So, and it was exactly 2 years. But it was a wonderful 2 years, and I enjoyed the heck out of it. We went over to Japan twice. We toured Europe once. And have you ever heard of the Bear Family Records Company? It's a recording place in Germany that has put out box sets of all these famous country singers. Anyway, Richard Weiss, who was the owner of that now, he hadn't even started Bear Family Records yet, and he booked Bill Monroe over there. And later on, he saved tapes of our shows over in Germany, and he put out a box set of those shows. And you can purchase that from Bear Family Records, and it's a box set of when we were there, and then later when he had another group over there. The box set is called Far Across the Blue Water, I think it's called. And it has a picture of us on the cover, and I was wearing a Navy pea jacket, and we were carrying our instruments, taking on the street corner. Anyway, I'm just rambling on here because, Bill Monroe, you can just talk all day about him, One time he told me he wanted me to go to Loretta Lynn's Western wear store and get some new hats for the Bluegrass Boys. And I didn't know he wanted some straw hats for the sun. He wore straw hats in the summertime and felt hats in the wintertime. So I went down there, and I didn't know what I was doing. And I purchased these hats that were straw, but they hadn't been blocked yet. They were still just rounded on top. And and so I brought them back, and they wore them, but they blocked them themselves, and so they looked awful. They looked awful. And I was real embarrassed about that. But we went out to L.A. one time, played out there, and we went into that Nudies Western wear store, and he make what they call nudie suits, and they're all the country singers were wearing them back then. Hank Snow always wore real fancy stuff, and Ernest Tubb, Ernie Ashworth was on the Opry all the time. His big hit was "Talk Back, Trembling Lips." You remember that song? And he had this suit, I think it was a nudie suit, that had pictures of big lips all over it. And but anyway, Bill went in there, and all he purchased in there was a hat, and it was a leather hat, but it was a Western style hat. And he purchased that in there, and then on our way back, we stopped at a truck stop somewhere, and he accidentally forgot his hat, and he left it at that truck stop. And then we got maybe 100 miles down the road, and he remembered he left his hat. So we turned around and went back just to get that hat. And when we went in there, that hat was sitting on the jukebox. There was a jukebox in there, and I thought that was pretty meaningful that Bill Monroe's hat was sitting on the jukebox, man. But that one other time we stopped at a truck stop, and we thought Bill was asleep in the back of the bus. And he had a little bedroom in the back of the bus, which was a horrible place because all the diesel fumes came up right in that spot. And it was also the roughest ride on the bus was in the back end and it was an old bus to begin with. So he had this bed back there where he was breathing diesel fumes all night long. And every time you hit a bump, you feel it the worst in the back end of a bus. Like the smoothest ride on a bus is right in the middle because you're right between the wheel bases. And so if you sit in the middle, it's a pretty smooth ride. But on the back end, it's horrible. But anyway, we thought he was asleep back there. Well, he was asleep back there when we pulled into the truck stop. But we all went in to eat. And then we got back on the bus and fired it up and took off. And we didn't realize that Bill had gotten out and he went to the restroom. And so we got way far down the road because we thought he was still asleep. And a highway patrolman pulled us over. And the highway patrolman says, "Boys, you got to go back and get your boss. He's back there." And he got on a pay phone and called the highway patrol and had him stop the bus. And so... I wasn't with him at this time, but I heard one time they pulled over to the side of a road, and he stepped out of the bus and fell down in this ditch that was right up next to the bus. But anyway, I heard one time he fell off the back of a stage one time, too. They had a stage it was an outdoor stage with curtains on the back end, but nothing behind the curtains. And he stepped back, went down, but he didn't get hurt, I guess. But so the traveling setup was not all that great because... we didn't have the bus all that much. It was mostly driving in Bill's station wagon. He would pick me up. I would meet him at if I was going to go to work on his farm, which wasn't all that much. I mean, I didn't have to go every day and work on his farm. It wasn't like that, but I enjoyed doing it. I had a good time doing it. But he would pick me up. I would meet him at that restaurant. Then I'd leave my car there at that restaurant, and he would drive me out in that station wagon to do the farm work. And we, at one point, there was a TV commercial campaign for Dr. Pepper, and they went around to all these Nashville artists, and they gave them the sheet music to a theme song, a little jingle about Dr. Pepper. So they gave us the sheet music. Well, none of us could read sheet music at all, but I guess they must have given us a tape too. And so we tried to learn that song, the little Dr. Pepper jingle, and we finally got it pretty good. We went into the studio and recorded it, and then they were also filming the actual session of recording, like they were, when we're sitting around talking on the mics and stuff. So there's a YouTube video out there of that commercial, and I if you type in Bill Monroe Dr. Pepper commercial, I think you might be able to find that. And he was singing. They showed video of him playing on the Opry and stuff, and they showed occasional shots of us playing it. That was really funny because there was a line in there, something about that's what Dr. Pepper has, originality. And Bill never did pronounce the word originality right. He always pronounced it originality. And he never did get it right. And that's what Dr. Pepper has, originality. And I still remember, once in a while, I still sing it. And so, since I have no pride, I'm going to try to sing Drink Dr. Pepper. Let's see. I'll think of it here in a minute. It's not a cola, it's something much, much more. It's not a root beer, there are root beers by the score. Drink Dr. Pepper, the joy of every boy and girl. It's the most original soft drink ever in the whole wide world. Dr. Pepper. And then it kind of fades out. Dr. Pepper. So anyway, that was fun doing that. I remember sitting around in Bill Monroe's office we were looking at sheet music, and it didn't help us a bit, but the words were there. So we learned the words from that. But and we went to Japan a couple of times, and they loved Bill Monroe over in Japan. They just went wild over him. They just treated us like we were the Beatles or somebody, man. And there's some YouTube videos out there of some of those concerts in Japan too. The best one was at a place in Osaka. It was called the Mainichi Hall, I think it was called, in Osaka. And that was a good show because we had been touring Japan. We were over there for about a month, and we played at shows every day. And we went up to the northern part of the country, and we rode the bullet trains up and down anyway, by the time we did this concert in Osaka at the Mainichi Hall, we were so warmed up. You know, if you're playing every day, it's easy to play then. It's just like the music plays itself if you're so that warmed up. And so that was one of the best concerts that we ever did. And so if you find that, it's Bill Monroe at Osaka, and it's probably out there on YouTube. That was a great concert, man. And we had this friend, Raymond Huffmaster, who used to drive I think he played with Bill a little bit. He drove the bus, but I think he drove the bus for Osborne Brothers too. But last time I talked to Raymond Huffmaster, he told me that that concert was the best live show that he ever heard of Bill Monroe. So I'm proud of that because Raymond knows what he's talking about. So yes.
The one that your cuts on your CD?
Yes, yeah, that came from that, yeah. And I just pulled off the ones where I was playing lead banjo, but everything was good on that show. Yeah, part of that show was on my CD when I reissued my Ladies on the Steamboat CD, which happened after I left Bill Monroe. For a while. Well, I was playing in Nashville for a while at a place called the Country Music Wax Museum, and with a group called the Misty Mountain Boys. And the bass player at that time was Terry Smith, who now plays bass for the Grascals. But it was with Bill Mounts and Jay Grizzle. Bill Mounts and Jay Grizzle and Terry Smith and me on banjo. But after we did that, that was during the rest of that winter. I left in September. The rest of that winter, I played there in the Country Music Wax Museum. Then I joined up with Buck White and the Down Home folks, Sharon and Cheryl White. And at that time, Sharon was still married to Jack Hicks, who was a banjo player that played with Bill Monroe before me. So I played with them for 2 years, and I learned a lot of stuff from Buck. He was a great mandolin player and a great piano player. And somebody said when he played the piano, he almost picked it like a mandolin. You know, you hear all these arpeggiated notes that were really on the money. You know, he didn't play that many chords. It was all single note stuff. Anyway, I can't remember why I was talking about that, but they were from Texas originally, and we went down to Texas a few times. We played the Kerrville Folk Festival in Texas a couple of times. There was also a Kerrville Bluegrass Festival in Kerrville, Texas. But anyway, that's neither here nor because that's with Buck White. So I'm going to stick with Bill Monroe. Oh yeah.
I heard you do a little Monroe imitation. Everybody, even if it's a bad Monroe, everybody does a Monroe. Did he know that people imitated him?
I think he did. But everybody always imitates Bill Monroe, and they talk like this. Yes, sir. You know, like one time a guy told me that it wasn't when I was with him, but one time a guy was riding in a car and Bill Monroe was driving, and he made some kind of traffic error, and he got pulled over. So. As the patrolman was walking up to the car, Bill Monroe reached over and put on his hat. Then he rolled the window down and he says, "Bill Monroe, Grand Ole Opry, how do you do, sir?" Yeah. But anyway, the way he talked, everybody, you know, there's a lot of other famous people, like famous jazz Well, everybody talks like Louis Armstrong, but there are other jazz greats where their band members would make fun of the way they talk too. They'd copy their accents and the way that the voice sounded, but everybody knows how to sound like Bill Monroe. Yeah. Yeah, Bean Blossom, and we were putting on workshops, and Ralph Lewis, who was from Asheville, North Carolina, which is now underwater, he was the guitar player, so he put on a workshop, and after the workshop was over, he did it right on the stage at Bean Blossom. Bill Monroe came up to the microphone and he says, does anybody ever have any questions they'd like to ask Ralph? Like, what kind of grease does he use in his hair? And then one time we were playing on that same stage, and the sun came out. It was cloudy, I guess, and the sun came out, and a shaft of sunlight hit what would be stage right if you were on the stage, but it would be to the left if you were in the audience. And so the sun was shining over there. Bill walked right over into that shaft of sunlight. He did have a period of time there when his brother Charlie was getting sick, and his brother Charlie passed away at the time when I was with Bill. And they were, of course, everybody's heard of the Monroe brothers, and they were a great duet. And they got their start. As a matter of fact, I grew up in Shenandoah, Iowa, and there was a radio station in Shenandoah, Iowa named KFNF. And the Monroe brothers, that was the first place they ever played together after they left the WLS Barn Dance. Bill, I don't know if Charlie was on the WLS Barn Dance, yeah. But mostly on the WLS Barn Dance, they mostly danced. And
Would he dance?
yeah, he would dance on stage. That's where he learned how to do that. You know, they would dance on the WLS Barn Dance. But Birch, his other brother Birch, was with him at that time. And Bill was doing most of the work. Like Birch and Charlie were just sitting around some hotel, and Bill would go out and work at the Sinclair refinery, and he was the one bringing in any money, and the other two weren't bringing any money. And he had a hard job, like scrubbing oil drums or something, and rolling them up and stacking them up and stuff. But anyway, Birch decided he didn't want to do it, so I guess he moved back to Nashville. I'm not sure, but Charlie and Bill took this job over in Shenandoah on radio station KFNF, which stands for Kind Friends Never Fail. That's how I can remember KFNF. So that's where they got their start, but they weren't there real long. But and that's also where the Everly Brothers hit really big with Wake Up Little Susie. They played in Shenandoah on the radio station in Shenandoah with their brother Ike Everly, and that was kind of a point of pride with me too, because I was from the same town where they were from, and the Everly Brothers came from the same area of Kentucky as Bill Monroe. They were from, I think, Muhlenberg County in Kentucky, and also Merle Travis was right from that area too. So there was a lot of music that came out of that area, and Bill Monroe learned a lot of blues music from a guy named Arnold Schultz who worked for the railroad, and he would come up through there, and Bill learned a lot of music from him, and that was way before my time though. But so we got a chance to record. I knew how to play Jerusalem Ridge, but when we went into the recording session, we recorded Jerusalem Ridge, but he had just the fiddle play it, and that's it. The fiddle, I think Kenny Baker played it like twice through or something. Bill Monroe didn't even take a break on it. So I was kind of disappointed that I wasn't able to play the banjo on it. But we did do Watson Blues, and I was able to play a break on Watson Blues, which was different than the standard banjo break. And the only thing that had ever been done before that was similar to that style was Jack Hicks's break on Walls of Time, on the Bill Monroe and James Monroe Father and Son album. And it's like what they call chromatic banjo rather than melodic, because it's notes that just kind of go up the scale and down, and playing every half note in between. It was kind of similar to that. And so I really felt lucky I was getting a chance to do that. And Bill liked it. and so we did that a few times. And I was recording a lot with Kenny Baker too, and he was writing some good tunes, and Bill would let him play a tune on the shows sometimes. And one of the tunes that he wrote, he called it Grassy Fiddle Blues, and I was able to play a break on that every time, and that gave me a chance to play some melodic tunes. And I was really big on fiddle tunes. I was raised around a lot of fiddle players, and there was a lot of fiddle players from Missouri that I learned tunes from, like Lyman Enlow and Gene Goforth, and so I was really big on fiddle tunes, and Bill loved fiddle tunes too. So that I had a connection with Bill in that way, because he loved fiddle tunes and so did I. And Baker, of course, he called him the greatest fiddler in bluegrass, and he probably was. He had the best bow arm I ever saw. Baker, it was like his arm was like it was made out of rubber. If you saw his right arm, it was just perfect intonation. He'd get perfect double stops every time. He was just unbelievably good fiddle player. I mean, just like he was an alien almost. He was so good. But so I learned a lot of fiddle music. And if Baker played it, if he featured Baker on a fiddle tune, Baker would give me a break on it. And Bill liked it, I think. So I got a chance to play some melodic banjo in that way too. So there's a lot of stories. Some of them are in my book. I have a book in there about my experiences with Bill Monroe. One of those stories is we were playing somewhere down in Alabama, I think it was, at a festival. And it was just horrendously hot and humid. And we were in the station wagon. We pulled into the park, and Bill left the engine of the station wagon running and with the air conditioner on, because he didn't want to get out. It was so hot. So he sat there with the engine idling like all afternoon. And we pulled out of that festival in the evening, and we were on this sandy road. It was a rock road, but it was more sand than rock. Anyway, we got a little ways out of there, and then the station wagon died. And Bill Monroe was sitting with some other people in the car behind us. And I got out and said, Bill, I'm sorry, but we ran out of gas. And so they left me sitting there by myself, and they all left, and they said, we'll try to find some gas and come back. Well, it was like on a Sunday night or something. There was nothing open, man. The gas station, they couldn't find a gas station. And later on, about after I'd been sitting there for about an hour and a half or something, Kenny Baker and Ralph Lewis came back, and they had a little coffee can with some gas. They pinched it closed, and I don't know where they got it, but they got it from somebody, and they poured that in there, and that was enough to get us back to the motel. I still remember that. But any other questions that you would like? I mean, I'm not even beginning to scratch the surface of all the...
Can you come back tomorrow, Bob?
Yeah. Yes. Oh, yes. Well, it came from the heart, and it was all of my personal memories. I did have some help with the listing of dates that we played, and one of the appendices of the book was pretty much every place we played, and I had people helping me look that stuff up. So that's kind of nice to to go back and figure out where you were playing. But I remember when Bill's brother Charlie died. Bill was in for a few weeks before Charlie died. Bill was in really a bad mood. That was the only time I ever really saw him really crabby and cranky. He was so worried about his brother Charlie, who eventually did pass away. And Charlie's wife, I better get this straight. It was a woman that Bill had been with first. Then she went with Charlie, and she got married to Charlie. Maybe I shouldn't talk about this. I don't know. Well, since I'm into it, she was sitting at the casket in the funeral home next to Charlie, and Bill wouldn't go in there because she was in there. And so Bill never got to go in and view Charlie because this woman sat there and she would not leave. But I remember we went to the funeral, and it was in a little bitty church in Rosine, Kentucky. And we went in there, and Bill Monroe walked in with all his Bluegrass Boys all around him, the four of us, and he was in the middle. And we walked down the aisle and sat down. It was really, and he had tears in his eyes. I remember that's the only time I ever saw him crying. So that was one of the sadder times. And then Bill Monroe himself, when he died, they had his funeral in that same church, and I went to that one too. And there wasn't a dry eye in the house that time either. And when Bill died, he used to go up to little kids. If he saw a little kid, he would reach into his pocket and hand them a quarter. I don't know if the kids liked it or not, but he would always do that. He would hand them a quarter. And so when Bill died, his casket was open at the funeral, and everybody went up and put quarters along the lid of the casket. And so all along the whole lid of the casket with all these quarters. So that was kind of a moving little tribute. Yeah. Anyway, this is just the beginning. I never have trouble talking about Bill Monroe. He was a great guy. I thought he was wonderful. Later on, after I was out of the band, he came up to Iowa City, where I went back to Iowa City, and he came up there and played at a place called McBride Hall, and he got me up on stage. Anytime he came near and I was there, he'd get me up on stage and I'd play a tune with him. And he had this booklet. It was like a souvenir program or something. And he came up and handed this thing to me, and I opened it up, and it says, "Your friend, Bill Monroe." And for some reason, that really, he probably signed that way, everything, but for some reason, that really got to me. "Your friend, Bill Monroe." I was so proud of that, and I still have that. And it was really a huge influence on my life. Probably the biggest influence of my life was playing with Bill and getting a chance to know him and playing on the Grand Ole Opry with him. One time we closed out an Opry show, and he said we finished some song in B, the key of B. It was Blue Night or something, and he says, "We're going to end with Pike County Breakdown." So I went into Pike County Breakdown, not really realizing I was still in B instead of A. It's supposed to be in A. So I played Pike County Breakdown, just ripped into it as hard as I could, and we pulled it off. Kate Baker played it, Monroe played it, and then after we got off the stage, we walked off the stage, and Baker turned around and he says, "You didn't even realize that you were in the wrong key playing that key of B." And I didn't, but they played it perfect, and Bill never even said a word to me about it, So... And meeting all those people on the Grand Ole Opry, we saw all the big stars, and they were all the old timers were there, and they're all gone now, Skeeter Davis, Dottie West, Hank Snow. Hank Snow always had his words with him. I didn't mind that because he sang some different song every time, but he put out a little thing of words. But I thought that was good because every time you heard Hank Snow on the Opry, he would do something different, whereas everybody else would always do the same song. Whatever their biggest hit was, they'd do it. But Hank Snow wasn't that way. He'd do a different song every time. And he'd play his little guitar leads and stuff. This was at the new Opry, though. I didn't get it and never got a chance to play at the Ryman Auditorium. The new Opry at Opryland had just been built the very same year that I joined Bill. So it was all brand new there. And it was really something. So anyway, I guess we must be done because it seemed like... Thank you. And thank you for asking those questions, man. Anytime somebody asks...
All right, that's going to do it for this bonus episode of the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. Thanks again to everyone at Great Lakes Music Camp for hosting the original Fireside Chat with Bob Black. If you dig the show, please consider contributing over at patreon.com/banjopodcast. And thanks to the regular sponsors, that's Peghead Nation Elderly Instruments, Sullivan Banjos, and Bluegrass Country Radio. As always, you can contact me at pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com. But that's going to do it for this one. I'll see you all next time, and happy holidays.